Well, welcome to the broadcast this afternoon. And as you all probably know, this is sort of taking place in lieu of a teaching that I was normally due today in Palo Alto here in California. But since, like most places in the world and around this country, we're kind of locked down and staying in our homes and trying to keep each other healthy and safe. And so we're coming to you this way. And I hope that you're in a nice place. And I thought just to begin the program with today that we take a few moments together just to kind of really just kind of arrive here, just let ourselves kind of settle in for a moment um, in this odd time. I think for us all, I think it's a new experience for all of us around the world as we're trying to overcome the virus and everything. So I know that all of you are sort of in your own homes and apartments and places around the world, and I'm really happy that we have an opportunity to share this time together and this space together, and maybe to take a moment, an hour or so, to let ourselves have a little bit different focus, because of course what's going on for us all occupies a fair amount of time and attention, and it's also so important to have a kind of resource, a kind of inner resource to a kind of calm state, a place where we feel a sort of touchstone for being at home within ourselves, because it is for ourselves. It's for our well-being and for our peace of mind and for our open heart, and but it's also for each other. That there's a lot of fear out around now, and a lot of anxiety, and there's a lot of sort of emotion that people are feeling. And I think that one of the most important things about our spiritual lives is connecting with a kind of dimension of being that, of course, is very involved in the world and in what we do and what we're encountering, especially what we're encountering now, for instance, but also a kind of dimension of being that where we can find an anchoring of something within ourself, within our own being, within being itself, that feels like a kind of stability, a kind of resource, Um, and I think that's especially important. We all see and are experiencing how important it is to have a deeper connection to ourselves, to our being, and also the being of each other, because it helps us to retain some sort of calmness, and maybe even more than just calmness, a kind of heartfulness, a sense of our own heart and um, our love, our compassion for one another, for the time we're in, um, and also a sense of freedom. So there's more inside of us than what's going on all around us in all of our lives. And so I thought it would be nice to take a few minutes to begin with, just to kind of have a sort of anchoring in our being. And, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by our being? You know? So the key to kind of beginning to touch in with your being is to just sort of, first of all, just acknowledge all the other dimensions of human experience. Um, uh, there's obviously your body sitting in front of a TV screen or a computer screen or a phone screen and looking. That's one part of our experience. There's, of course, the world around us and our world of relations and all of that. There's our sense of the history of our lives. There's our who we imagine ourselves to be, our kind of identity. We often think of that as our sort of ego identity, which is mostly about the past, kind of collection of the past, um, coupled with our sort of ideas and our beliefs and our opinions, and all of that forms this kind of identity. And so that's that's another dimension of our experience. And then there's a kind of something just not just underneath it, because it is in the midst of all that, is our being. And our being is something more subtle. Your being is who you've always been, even before you had an ego, before you or I, before we developed any identity at all. We we were being. Absolutely, we were being, and yet we had no identity. We had no idea of who we are, and yet we were fully, in many ways, completely. And so the point isn't to kind of go backwards into a kind of regressed state of being necessarily, but it's to be remind ourselves to notice. That's a good place to begin, to notice, to recognize that what we are in our being is something that transcends who we think we are in our imagination, and also in our memory and our collective life experience, and all of the identity that kind of gets formed around that, our sense of being that gets constructed around that. But our being is something that's always been, right? It's always been. Before we had a before we knew really our name that well, before we had much of a history, before we had a kind of consciousness where we could reflect back. And mostly when we reflect back, we're usually reflecting to a large extent into our mind, for better or worse. But there are some points for being, for the simplicity of being, and the immediacy of being, and the transition to come into your being, into a kind of direct connection with being, is much simpler than most people imagine. The key to it is letting your attention sort of um, transition from being in the mind, in this cognitive place of thoughts and ideas, and the narrative that most human beings walk around with most of the time, and just sort of letting all that be,